All right, let's start with a little thought experiment. If I asked you, just right now, to close your eyes and picture a pharaoh, the archetypal image of an ancient Egyptian ruler, who pops into your head?
Oh, that's a good one. For most people, I think it's going to be one of two, right? You're either going to picture the boy king Tutankhamun, because of that incredible gold death
Of
mask.
course, the mask, it's iconic. You can't not picture it.
Totally. It's probably the most famous single artifact in the world, so you've got him. Or
Yes.
you picture the other guy, the one who seemed to build half of Egypt.
The one whose statues are they're so big they literally dwarf the landscape.
Yeah.
Ramesses.
Ramesses II, Ramesses the Great. And honestly, if you're walking through the ruins of Egypt today, he is the one you absolutely cannot escape. His face is on the pylons, his cartouche is carved into every available surface. He ruled for 66 years.
Which is an eternity in the ancient world. I mean, most people didn't even live half that long.
It's an eternity in the modern world. Seriously, just think about it. Imagine a single president or prime minister ruling from, say, the end of World War II all the way until today. That is the kind of continuity we are talking about. It's staggering.
But there's a specific angle I want to take with this deep dive. Because while Ramesses the Great is the brand name, the official title, there's another name associated with him that changes the vibe completely. If you took English Lit in high school, you know it. Ozymandias.
Ah, yes, the subject of Percy Bysshe Shelley's sonnet. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair.
That's the one. And the poem, it's all about this shattered statue in the middle of an empty desert. It's the ultimate metaphor for how power, no matter how great, eventually crumbles to dust. But here's the hook that a lot of people miss. Ozymandias is Ramesses II.
That's right. It's a Greek corruption, a transliteration of part of his throne name, User Matre Setepanre. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, writing 1,000 years after Ramesses, heard it, wrote it down as Ozymandias, and Shelley just ran with it.
So we have this tension right from the start, this amazing duality. On one side, you have the King of Kings, the guy who tried to, hack immortality by brute forcing his image into history. And on the other side, you have the broken statue in the sand.
The man versus the myth, the propaganda versus the inevitable decay.
Exactly. And that is our mission today. We are going to dig past the propaganda. And let's be honest, Ramesses was maybe the greatest propagandist who ever lived to find the actual human being. We've got military records, we have peace treaties, we have architectural plans, and maybe the most incredible source of all. We have the forensic pathology report on his actual mummy.
And what we find when we put all that together is, well, it's surprisingly complex. He wasn't just a statue. He was a master tactician, a frantic, almost obsessive builder, a father to over 100 children, and eventually a very sick, very frail old man.
So let's rewind the clock. Before he was the great ancestor hunched over on a throne, he was a young man. And apparently he was looking for a fight.
Well, he was a young king with a lot to prove. He comes to the throne in his early 20s. His father, Seti I, had been this incredibly successful warrior king, really stabilizing the empire. So Ramesses needed to show everyone, the generals, the priests, that he could hold the line, that he was his father's son.
And his first major test didn't come from a rival empire, which is what I would have expected. It came from the sea.
This is one of the most fascinating and I think often overlooked chapters of his early reign. It's year 2. The Nile Delta, which is Egypt's breadbasket and its gateway to the Mediterranean, was being terrorized.
By pirates, which I have to say isn't the first thing I think of when I picture ancient Egypt. I picture chariots in the sand, massive temples, not, swashbuckling on the high seas.
Right. But it was a huge problem. It was a very specific group called the Sheridan Sea Pirates. We aren't 100% sure where they came from. Some scholars say Sardinia, others maybe Ionia on the coast of Turkey. But what we do know is they were seafaring raiders. They had these sleek, fast warships, and they were intercepting merchant vessels coming into the mouth of the Nile. They were choking off Egypt's trade.
So conventional wisdom says you send out the Navy, right? You chase them down.
But that's the thing. Egypt was fundamentally a river power, not a deep-sea naval power. Their ships were designed for the Nile. Chasing these sleek pirate ships across the open Mediterranean would have been a fool's errand. They'd never catch them. So Ramesses did something that gives us our first real glimpse into his strategic mind. He didn't chase them. He set a trap.
Okay, how do you trap a pirate fleet?
You use the geography to your advantage. The Nile Delta is a maze of distributaries, little river branches, and marshland. So Ramesses positioned his troops and his own ships hidden in the reed beds and at the various river mouths. He then effectively left out some bait, a few seemingly undefended merchant ships, to lure the Sheridan in.
He invited them into the kill zone.
Precisely. He let them get comfortable, let them think it was just another easy raid. Once the Sheridan fleet was inside the river mouth, fighting the currents and fully committed to their attack, Ramesses sprung the trap from all sides. He had archers on the banks, and his own ships came out from hiding to block their retreat to the sea. It wasn't really a battle, it was a containment operation, a brilliant one.
Here's the twist that I found really, really surprising. He captures these guys, these people who've been robbing his kingdom blind, and he doesn't execute them. He doesn't enslave them.
No, he hires them.
That seems incredibly risky. I mean, hey, you guys are great at fighting and killing my people. Want a job guarding me while I sleep? That just sounds nuts.
It does sound insane, doesn't it? But you have to look at the military context of the time. The Sheridan brought something to the table that the Egyptians didn't have. Better technology.
What kind of technology are we talking about?
Swords. Specifically, a type of sword. The Egyptians at this time were primarily using bronze sickle swords called the khopesh, or daggers designed for stabbing. They were effective, but the Sheridan carried the Naui 6 type sword. It's a long, straight blade designed for slashing and hacking as well as thrusting. It completely changed the mechanics of close quarters combat.
So he looked at these pirates and didn't see enemies. He saw a special forces unit.
Exactly, an upgrade to his arsenal. He incorporated them into his personal bodyguard. And this is the cool part for us. If you look at the battle reliefs Ramesses carved later, especially the ones from Kadesh, you can spot the Sheridan. They stand out. They wear these very distinct horned helmets with a big ball on top, and they're carrying round shields and those long slashing swords. They're right there guarding the Pharaoh.
It's extremely pragmatic. He valued competence over nationality or even past loyalty. And he was going to need those bodyguards because by year 5 of his reign, he wasn't fighting pirates anymore. He was picking a fight with the other heavyweight of the Bronze Age.
The Hittite Empire.
This is the main event, the Battle of Kadesh. If you read Ramesses' own account of it, this is his greatest triumph. He puts it on every wall he can find. It's his signature moment.
He does, or he absolutely does. But if you analyze the troop movements, and especially if you read the letters and records from the Hittite side, the story is very, very different. This wasn't a triumph, it was nearly a catastrophe.
Okay, so set the scene for us. Ramesses is marching north into what is modern-day Syria to capture the strategic city of Kadesh. He has a massive army.
For the time, it was huge, something like 20,000 men. He split them into 4 divisions, each named after one of Egypt's great gods: Amun, Ra, Ta, and Sutek.
Sutek, that's Set, right?
Yes, exactly, the god of storms and chaos. So Ramesses is personally leading the Amun division, and it's at the very front of this long marching column.
And this is where the intelligence failure happens. A big one.
It's a classic counterintelligence operation. Ramesses' scouts captured 2 local Bedouins who claim to have deserted the Hittites. They're brought before the Pharaoh, and they tell him exactly what he wants to hear. They say, "The Hittite king, Muwatalli II, is afraid of you. He's miles and miles away to the north, near Aleppo."
That's what Ramesses wanted to hear. He's young, he's ambitious.
Confirmation bias is a dangerous thing in warfare. Ramesses believes them completely. He thinks Kadesh is undefended or lightly defended. So he decides to race ahead with just his own Amun division to set up camp and lay siege to the city, leaving the other 3 divisions strung out for miles behind him on the road.
But the Bedouins were lying.
They were plants. They were Hittite spies sent specifically to feed him this disinformation. The Hittite king, Muwatalli II, wasn't in Aleppo. He was hiding his entire army. We're talking 2,500 chariots and thousands of infantry behind the mound, the tell of the city of Kadesh, literally just on the other side of the river from where Ramesses was about to make camp.
It's a literal ambush. He has no idea what's coming.
And it is a devastating one. While Ramesses is setting up his tent and his camp is in disarray, the main force of Hittite chariots crosses the Orontes River and smashes at full speed into the side of the 2nd Egyptian Division, the Ra Division, while they are still marching. They weren't in battle formation. They were completely unprepared.
It must have been absolute chaos.
Total panic. The Ra division just evaporated. It shattered. Survivors fled forward, crashing into Ramesses' own camp, which created even more confusion and terror. Then the Hittite chariots, having destroyed 1 division, wheeled around and completely surrounded Ramesses and his camp. He was cut off from his reinforcements, surrounded by the enemy, with his own troops fleeing in every direction.
By all rights, this ends with Ramesses dead or captured and Egypt humiliated for a generation.
It should have. And this is where the warrior's king persona is actually earned. We have to give him credit here. According to his own account, which is probably exaggerated but directionally true, instead of surrendering or fleeing, Ramesses jumped into his chariot. He rallied his household troops, including those Sheridan bodyguards we just mentioned, and he charged.
He charged the enclosing line, the one that was surrounding him.
He identified a weak point in the Hittite encirclement and he punched through it. He personally led the counterattack, driving them back toward the river. Now, there was a technological difference here that helped. Hittite chariots were heavy. They carried 3 men, a driver, a warrior, and a shield bearer. They were like heavy tanks designed for smashing infantry lines.
And the Egyptian chariots?
Lighter, faster. Just 2 men, a driver, and an archer. They were more like mobile missile platforms. In the open field, the Hittite charge was unstoppable, but in the chaos of a cluttered camp, the lighter, more maneuverable Egyptian chariots actually had an advantage. They could wheel around and pepper the heavier Hittite chariots with arrows.
So he fights his way out of the trap.
He holds them off. He fights desperately for hours, just long enough for some of his reinforcements, a separate force called the Nerin, to arrive from the coast and stabilize the line. The Hittites, who had stopped to loot the Egyptian camp, were caught by surprise and retreated back across the river.
Okay, so he survives day 1.
Yeah.
But the battle's not over. What happens the next day?
It's a stalemate. They fight again, but neither side can deliver a knockout blow. Ramesses realizes he can't possibly take the city of Kadesh now. His army is battered, his supply lines are a mess. So he gathers what's left of his forces and goes home.
He goes home without the city he came all this way to conquer.
Correct. And strategically, you could argue it gets worse for Egypt. Because the Egyptians retreated, the Hittites were able to move south and take control of the entire region around Damascus. Egypt actually lost territory after this great victory.
But you wouldn't know that if you visited the temples in Egypt.
Not in a million years. When Ramesses got home, he launched the biggest public relations campaign the ancient world had ever seen. He had the battle carved onto the walls of the Ramesseum, Karnak, Luxor, Abu Simbel, anywhere, with a big, flat surface. And the narrative was always the same. It was. I was alone, abandoned by my cowardly army, and through my own divine strength, I defeated thousands of Hittites single-handedly.
He turned a massive intelligence failure and a tactical draw into a mythological superhero story starring himself.
It's brilliant, really, utterly brilliant propaganda. He realized that the people back in Thebes or Memphis didn't have CNN or Twitter. They only knew what he told them. And if he says he won and he builds a 50-foot-tall statue of himself winning, then, well, he won. History is written by the guy with the biggest chisel.
But the story doesn't end with the war. It ends with something that I think is actually more impressive in the long run. The peace treaty.
Yes. The fighting didn't stop immediately after Kadesh. It kind of dragged on for another 15 years or so, more of a Cold War with occasional flare-ups. Eventually, both empires realized they had other problems. A new power, the Assyrians, was rising in the east and threatening both of them. They needed to stop fighting each other. So in year 21 of Ramesses' reign, he and the new Hittite king, Hattusili III, signed a treaty.
And we actually have copies of this, right? This isn't just a story.
We do. And this is the coolest part for historians. We have the Egyptian version carved in hieroglyphs on a stone wall at the Karnak temple, and we have the Hittite version, which was written on a silver tablet and then copied onto clay tablets, which were found in the Hittite capital of Hattusa in modern Turkey.
Do they agree on what happened?
The terms of the treaty match up perfectly, but the preambles, the introductions are hilarious. The Egyptian version says, effectively, the Hittite king came crawling to us on his belly, begging for peace.
Of course it does.
The Hittite version says, Ramesses, the great king of Egypt, sent messengers to us, asking to be our brother and to make peace.
So everyone has to save face for their home audience.
Exactly. But the terms themselves were incredibly advanced for the time. It included a non-aggression pact, a mutual defensive alliance, meaning if a third party attacks one, the other has to send troops to help, and a very, very specific extradition clause.
What was the point of the extradition clause? It seems oddly specific.
It was all about political stability. The Hittite king, Hattusili III, had actually usurped the throne from his nephew. He was worried that his nephew or other political enemies might flee to Egypt and try to get Ramses' help to launch a coup. So Hattusili wanted it in writing that if any of his high-ranking enemies fled to Egypt, Ramesses wouldn't harbor them. He would arrest them and send them back.
It's surprisingly modern. It sounds like something countries would negotiate today.
It is. In fact, a giant copy of the Treaty of Kadesh is displayed at the United Nations headquarters in New York. It is the oldest lasting international peace treaty in recorded history, and it worked. The border stayed peaceful for the rest of Ramesses' long, long life. He even married 2 Hittite princesses to seal the deal.
Which brings us to the next phase of his life. He secured the peace, he spun the war. Now he needs to concrete his legacy. And I mean that literally. Let's talk about Ramesses the Builder.
Or Ramesses the Brander, because that's really what he did. It wasn't just about building new things, it was about stamping his name on the entire country, including on things his ancestors had built.
It started with a new home, a new center of power. He moved the capital.
Right. For centuries, Thebes was the great religious capital in the south, and Memphis was the main administrative hub near the top of the delta. Ramesses decided to build a brand new, glittering capital in the eastern delta, not far from where his own family came from. He called it, and this is a shocker, Ramesses, the House of Ramesses.
Why move it all the way up to the delta? Isn't that just mud and marshes?
Yes.
Why not stick with the established cities?
A few reasons. One, it was strategic. Remember the Hittites and the constant threats from the Levant. Ramesses was perfectly positioned as a staging ground for military campaigns into Syria-Palestine. It was a forward operating base and a capital all in one.
So it's a military city.
It became a massive military-industrial complex. We've found archaeological evidence of huge factories, almost like assembly lines, that were churning out weapons. The estimate suggests they could produce 1,000 weapons a week and maybe 250 chariots every 2 weeks.
That's not a city, that's a war machine.
But it was also designed to be luxurious. It had a huge zoo with exotic animals brought from Africa and Asia, lions, giraffes, you name it. It had beautiful canals, palaces decorated with brilliant blue faience tiles. It was designed to dazzle foreign dignitaries when they arrived by sea. The first thing they'd see was this incredible, powerful, wealthy city. Look at our wealth, look at our power.
But if I go to Egypt today, I can't book a tour to Ramesses, can I?
No. And this is a true Ozymandias moment. The branch of the Nile that fed the city, that made it all possible, eventually silted up and changed its course. The water moved, so the people had to move. The city was abandoned. And then, a few centuries later, kings from the 21st dynasty actually stripped the stone from Ramesses to build their own new capital, Tanis, nearby.
So the great capital was cannibalized for spare parts.
It was. Today, the site of Ramesses is mostly just agricultural fields. Archaeologists have found the bases of his colossus statues buried under farmers' crops. The mighty city has returned to mud.
But while the mud brick city vanished, the stone temples in the south didn't. And this is where Ramesses got really clever with his deep carving technique. Explain that to me.
Okay, so in Egyptian art, there are 2 main ways to carve on a stone wall. The traditional way is raised relief. That's where you cut away the background. So the figure of the king and the hieroglyphs stand out from the surface. It's very elegant, very detailed, but it has a major flaw.
It's easy to sand off.
Exactly. If a later pharaoh doesn't like you, or more likely, just wants to save money and steal your beautifully carved monument, they can have their workers grind the relief flat and then carve their own name right over top of it. It happened all the time. Ramesses wanted to prevent that. He wanted permanence. So he ordered most of his carvings to be done in sunk relief.
Where you carve the image into the stone instead of cutting away the background?
Deeply. Some of the hieroglyphs of his name, his cartouche, are cut 5 or 6 inches deep into solid granite. To erase that, you would literally have to destroy the entire wall. It's almost impossible.
He was embedding his copyright directly into the structure itself, future-proofing his brand.
And it had another aesthetic benefit. In the harsh Egyptian sunlight, deep carving creates stark, black shadows. It makes the image pop from a distance. It was a branding strategy. He wanted his name and his image to be visible, to be readable from hundreds of yards away.
And nowhere is this more in-your-face, more monumental than Abu Simbel.
The ultimate ego project. I mean, just imagine it. He finds a mountain in the heart of Nubia-conquered territory and has it carved into a temple with 4 65-foot-tall statues of himself sitting on the front.
The message of the Nubians was pretty clear, I'd imagine.
I am washing you. I am your god. But the most fascinating part of Abu Simbel is what happens inside. Twice a year, historically, on February 22nd and October 22nd, supposedly his coronation and birthday, the rising sun shines directly through the entrance, down this 200-foot-long corridor, and illuminates the statues in the innermost sanctuary.
The Holy of Holies.
Right. And who is sitting on the bench in that sanctuary? There are 4 statues, the great gods, Ta, Amun, Ra-Harakti, and a statue of Ramesses himself.
He put himself on the bench with the major gods of the pantheon.
While he was still alive. That is the key. Most pharaohs became divine after death. Ramesses was effectively saying, no, I am a living god, right here, right now. And the alignment is genius because the sunlight illuminates the statues of Ramesses, Amun, and Ra. But crucially, it leaves Ptah, who is a god of creation, but also associated with the underworld and darkness. The engineering and astronomical calculation required to get that right is just staggering.
It connects back to the Ozymandias statue, though. The specific one that inspired the poem was at his mortuary temple in Thebes, the Ramesseum.
Yes. That statue was a single block of syenite granite, quarried in Aswan, shipped hundreds of miles down the Nile, and it weighed an estimated 1,000 tons.
How do you even move 1,000 tons in the Bronze Age?
With extreme difficulty. You're talking about massive wooden sledges, thousands of men, and probably building huge mud brick ramps. They would pour water on the sand in front of the sledge to reduce friction. But that's the statue that eventually fell, probably in an earthquake. When Shelley wrote, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert," he was describing the ruins of that specific colossus.
It's amazing to think that Shelley never actually saw it. He just read a description of it, right?
That's right. He read the account by Diodorus Siculus, who called it the tomb of Ozymandias. But the feeling of the poem, that sense of faded glory, it perfectly captures the reality of the ruins. Ramesses built for eternity, but gravity and time eventually won.
Gravity won against the stone, maybe? But biologically. Ramesses put up a pretty good fight against mortality, too. We need to talk about the family.
The family man is such an understatement. Ramesses was the patriarch of a dynasty within a dynasty.
We know he had a lot of wives, which was standard for a king, but there was one who was clearly the favorite, the great love of his life.
Nefertari. Her name means the beautiful companion. And everything we see in the record points to this being a genuine love match, not just a political or diplomatic arrangement.
How do we know that? What's the evidence?
You just have to look at the monuments. At Abu Simbel, he built a second, smaller temple right next to his own massive one. It's dedicated to Nefertari and the goddess Hathor. And on the facade of that temple, her statues are the exact same height as his.
That's unusual, right? Usually the queen is a tiny little figure standing next to the pharaoh's giant shin.
It's almost unheard of. It puts her on an equal footing with him, at least symbolically. And then there is her tomb. Her tomb in the Valley of the Queens is widely, and I think correctly, considered the Sistine Chapel of ancient Egypt.
I've seen photos. The colors, even after 3,000 years, are unbelievably vivid.
They call one room the Golden Hall. The ceiling is painted a deep, dark blue with thousands of golden stars. The portraits of her on the walls are so delicate, so lifelike. It really suggests that Ramesses took his absolute best artisans off of his own projects and said, forget my temple for a bit. Go make this perfect for her.
But then there are the children. The sheer number is just hard to wrap your head around.
The estimates vary, but we're pretty sure he had somewhere between 88 and 103 children, something like 50 sons and 50 daughters.
Imagine the Thanksgiving dinner logistics. It's mind-boggling.
It was almost certainly a deliberate political strategy. He created an entire nobility class made entirely of his own bloodline. He put his sons in charge of the army, the major priesthoods, the civil administration. He wanted to make the 19th dynasty coup-proof by having a Ramesside in every key position of power.
But where do you bury 50 sons? That's a lot of funerals.
Well, that was a mystery for a long time. Archaeologists knew about a tomb called KV5 in the Valley of the Kings, but they thought it was small and completely ruined. It had been flooded and filled with debris for centuries. In fact, in the 1980s, the Egyptian authorities were planning to build a bus turnaround and a parking lot for tourists right over the top of it.
That would have been a pretty big mistake.
A huge mistake. In 1995, an American Egyptologist named Kent Weeks decided to give it one last look before it was paved over. He started clearing the debris at the entrance and realized the main corridor didn't end after a few feet. It kept going.
And going.
And going. It turned out to be a labyrinth. It is, by far, the largest tomb in the entire Valley of the Kings. To date, they've uncovered over 150 corridors and chambers. It's a massive, sprawling mausoleum built for the sons of Ramesses II.
But there's a real tragedy built into this, isn't there?
Yeah.
The reason so many of his sons needed a tomb is because Ramesses lived to be 90 years old.
That's the double-edged sword of a long life. He outlived almost everyone. He outlived Nefertari by decades. He outlived his firstborn son and heir, Amunhotep. He outlived his most famous and accomplished son, Kaimwaset.
Kamwaset's a fascinating character in his own right, isn't he? He was kind of the world's first archaeologist.
Yes. Kamwaset became the high priest of Ptah at Memphis, and he dedicated his life to excavating and restoring the pyramids and temples of the Old Kingdom monuments that were already ancient to them. He was a scholar, a preservationist. And Ramesses had to bury him, too. By the time Ramesses finally died, his heir was his 13th son, Merneptah. And Merneptah was already an old man himself, probably in his 60s, when he finally got the crown.
It's such a melancholy image. The old king wandering the halls of Ramesses, surrounded by the ghosts of his wife and a dozen of his children.
It really reminds us that behind the King of Kings bluster, behind the giant stone face, there was a man who must have suffered immense personal loss over and over again.
And speaking of suffering,
Mm-hmm.
let's move to our final segment, the body. Because we don't have to guess what Ramesses looked like or what ailed him. We have him.
We do. His mummy is one of the best preserved royal mummies ever found. And the forensic analysis done on it tells us a story that the statues and reliefs completely hide.
So let's strip away the stone mask. What did Ramesses the Great actually look like as a person?
Well, he was tall for an ancient Egyptian, about 5'7". He had a very strong, prominent, hooked nose, an aquiline nose. You can see it very clearly in his profile, even as a mummy. But the detail that really shocked researchers when they first studied him closely came from the microscopic analysis of his hair.
This is the famous red hair thing.
Yes. In 1976, when his mummy was in Paris, scientific analysis showed that he had naturally red hair. In his old age, he seems to have dyed it with henna to cover the gray and keep that reddish color, but in his youth, he was a redhead.
And in ancient Egypt, that wasn't just a hair color. It had deep cultural and religious meaning.
Huge meaning. Red was the color associated with the god Set.
The god Set, the chaotic storm god, the one who murdered his brother Osiris in the foundation myth of their religion.
The bad boy of the Egyptian pantheon, exactly. But you have to remember, Ramesses' family, they were from the Delta, where Set was still worshipped as a powerful martial god. His own father's name was Seti, which means man of Set. So for Ramesses to be born with red hair would have been seen as a divine mark. It marked him as having the chaotic, powerful, unpredictable energy of the god Set. It fit his warrior king brand perfectly.
So he was genetically branded for the role he was meant to play.
Yeah.
By the time he was 90, that warrior body was, well, it was falling apart.
The medical report is painful just to read. He was a wreck. He had severe arthritis, especially in his hips, but the worst part was his spine. He had an advanced case of a condition we now call DSH diffuse idiopathic skeletal hyperestosis.
Which means what, in simple terms?
It means the ligaments along his spine hardened into bone. His spine essentially fused into a single curving column. In his final years, he would have walked with a severe, painful hunch. He would have been unable to turn his head. The erect, powerful king you see on the temple walls was, in reality, a man who could barely look up from the ground.
And I heard his teeth were an absolute nightmare.
The bane of almost all ancient Egyptians. Their bread was ground on stone grinding slabs, so it was always full of sand and grit. Over a lifetime, it ground their teeth down to the nerves. The analysis of Ramesses' jaw showed he had terrible dental abscesses. In fact, he had a massive infection in his lower jaw that had eaten away at the bone and likely caused septic shock, sending poison through his entire system.
So that's what finally killed him.
Or toothache.
It's the leading theory. Imagine the ultimate irony. The most powerful man on earth, a living god who could command armies and move mountains, dying in agony because he couldn't get a root canal.
It really, really humanizes him. But even after he died, the drama didn't stop. His mummy has traveled more in death than most people I know travel in life. He had a very rough afterlife, at least for the first few centuries. He was buried in his tomb, KB7, a massive tomb in the Valley of the Kings. But within a century or two, the New Kingdom Empire collapsed. Central authority broke down. The Valley of the Kings was being systematically looted by tomb robbers. The priests of the 21st dynasty realized Ramesses and the other great kings weren't safe.
So they had to move him.
It was a desperate shell game to protect the royal ancestors. They took him out of his plundered tomb, they rewrapped him, they hid him in his father's tomb for a while. Then they moved him to the tomb of an obscure queen named Inhapi. Then finally they realized nowhere in the valley was safe. So they took Ramesses, along with dozens of other great kings, Thutmose III, Seti III, Amenhotep III, and they stacked them like cordwood in a secret, unfinished cliff tomb called TT-320.
The royal cache.
The royal cache. And that's where they stayed, hidden in the dark for almost 3,000 years. until 1881, when a local family of tomb robbers stumbled upon it and started selling priceless royal artifacts on the black market. The authorities eventually tracked them down and found the greatest kings of Egypt's golden age all piled together in plain wooden coffins.
But Ramesses had one more trip to take, and this one required a plane ticket.
The 1976 trip to Paris, this is such a famous story. By the mid-70s, curators at the Cairo Museum noticed that the mummy was deteriorating rapidly. It was being attacked by a fungal infection. They didn't have the technology in Egypt to treat it, so in an unprecedented move, they arranged to send him to the Musée de l'Homme in Paris for gamma-ray irradiation treatment.
Now, I have to ask you about the internet myth, because I've seen the picture of a custom-made Egyptian passport for Ramesses II with his photo and his occupation listed as King Deceased. Please tell me that's real.
I really, really hate to burst the bubble, but the image you see online is a wonderful digital mock-up made by an artist much later. He didn't have a little booklet with a passport photo.
Darn. I wanted it to be true.
However, the underlying truth of the story is still there, and I think even better. French law at the time required valid identity and entry papers for any human remains, living or dead, entering the country. So there was a huge amount of paperwork, a passport in the legal sense. But the best part is the arrival.
How was he greeted when he landed?
When the French military plane carrying his coffin landed at Le Bourget Airport in Paris, Ramesses II was greeted on the tarmac by the French Secretary of State for Universities and a full detachment of the Republican Guard who presented arms.
He got a full military salute.
He was received with the full military honors befitting a visiting head of state, which technically he still was.
That is fantastic. A 3,000-year-old corpse inspecting the troops. It's the ultimate testament to his fame.
It shows the power of his name, doesn't it? Even as a dried husk, he commands that level of respect. After the treatment, he was flown back to Egypt. And just recently, in 2021, he was the star of the show in the Golden Parade when 22 royal mummies were moved in a massive procession to the new National Museum of Egyptian Civilization in Cairo. He was the grand finale of the parade.
So we've looked at the warrior, the builder, the father, and the body. And I keep coming back to that original tension we started with, the Ozymandias poem. Its message is nothing beside remains. It says that power is futile because it all just turned to dust.
But in a very real way, Ramesses proves the poem wrong.
How so?
Because we are sitting here in the 21st century talking about him. We know his face, we know his name, we know his battles, we know who his wife was, his deep carving strategy, his propaganda. It actually worked. He didn't achieve physical immortality, nobody does. But he achieved a kind of informational immortality.
He brute forced his way into the future.
Exactly. But there is a huge caveat, a twist that he never would have anticipated. We know him, but we don't worship him as a god. Thanks to science, we know him as a human. We know about his bad teeth and his fused spine and his brilliant propaganda spin at Kadesh.
We've peered behind the curtain of the God King.
We have. And I think that makes him infinitely more interesting. A perfect, all-powerful god is boring. A flawed, brilliant, desperate, red-headed genius who tried to conquer time itself. Now that's a story.
So here's the thought I want to leave everyone with. Ramesses used stone to deep carve his legacy because in his world, that was the most permanent medium. He knew paper or papyrus would rot. He physically altered the landscape to make sure he wasn't forgotten.
And today, we do almost the opposite. We build our legacies in the cloud. We leave digital footprints, photos, documents, social media profiles that feel permanent but are actually incredibly fragile. A server crashes, a file gets corrupted, a tech company goes bankrupt, and our entire history vanishes in a puff of digital smoke.
So, in our digital age, what is the modern equivalent of deep carving? How do you leave a mark that lasts for 3,000 years when everything we create is made of pixels?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? Maybe we are all Ozymandias now, just building beautiful, elaborate castles in the air.
Or maybe we just need to find some really good granite. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure.